Corporal Elena Reyes knelt beside her medical pack in the dusty staging area of forward operating base Leatherneck, fingers moving through supplies with practiced efficiency. The Afghanistan sun beat down on the rows of equipment laid out for inspection, turning the metal buckles hot enough to burn. Staff Sergeant Vickers stopped in front of her gear, his boots crunching on gravel as the other Marines in the patrol unit glanced over. "Your pack weighs 43 pounds, Vickers said, nudging it with his boot. "That's 8 pounds over standard loadout." Reyes looked up, squinting against the glare. "Extra blood expanders, Staff Sergeant. The route takes us through terrain where medevac response time could hit 20 minutes. If we take casualties with significant blood loss, those 8 pounds could mean the difference between stable and critical." Vickers shook his head, his expression hardening. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. You overthink everything, Corporal. We've run this route a dozen times. You're hauling weight that's just going to slow you down, make you a liability when we need to move fast." Behind him, 3 Marines from the patrol unit exchanged looks. Kowalski leaned toward Chun, his voice carrying just enough to reach Reyes. "Female Marines always overpack. They don't understand weight distribution like we do. Probably thinks she needs her whole aid station out there." Harris laughed, adjusting his rifle sling. "Maybe she should carry flowers too, make the casualties more comfortable." The comments settled into the hot air as Reyes returned her attention to her pack, removing 2 blood expander units and setting them aside. Her jaw tightened, but her hands remained steady, reorganizing the remaining supplies to redistribute the weight. Vickers watched her for another moment before moving down the line to inspect the next Marine's gear. Lieutenant Marsh stood near the vehicle's staging area, reviewing a tablet that displayed the patrol route. His eyes moved between the screen and the assembled Marines, pausing briefly on the exchange with Reyes before returning to his route planning. The map showed a 15-kilometer loop through mountainous terrain, with Route Tampa cutting through a narrow valley that had been flagged for previous IED activity. Reyes finished adjusting her pack and stood, slinging it over her shoulders to test the new weight distribution. The supplies felt balanced now, though the absent blood expanders left a gap in her mental inventory that nagged at her. She walked to her assigned vehicle, the rear Humvee in the 4-vehicle convoy, and began a final equipment check of the medical supplies stored in the back compartment. "Where are you watching from? Does your state honor combat medics like they should?" The question drifted through her mind as she counted tourniquets, her training reminding her that recognition mattered less than preparedness. The compartment held the standard complement of combat medical gear, but Reyes opened her personal pack and pulled out 4 additional tourniquets she had purchased herself. She tucked them into easily accessible positions within the vehicle's storage, her movements quick and purposeful. If Vickers noticed the extra supplies, he would call it more evidence of her inability to follow orders. If she needed them and didn't have them, Marines would die while she explained why she had obeyed. Kowalski approached the rear vehicle, checking his rifle one final time. He glanced at Reyes as she secured the medical compartment. "You know he's going to write you up if he catches you adding unauthorized gear." Reyes closed the compartment door. "Then I guess I better make sure nothing happens that would require me to use it." The other Marines began loading into their assigned vehicles as Vickers conducted a final radio check with each driver. The convoy would depart in 10 minutes, following Route Tampa through the valley before looping back through the mountain pass. Intelligence reports indicated low threat levels for the area, with no significant enemy activity in the past 72 hours. Marsh approached Vickers near the lead vehicle, the tablet still in his hand. "The route's clear according to current intel, but we should maintain standard dispersal intervals. QRF is 18 minutes out if we need them." Vickers nodded, his confidence evident in his posture. "We'll be fine, Lieutenant. This is a routine patrol. The biggest threat out, there's someone panicking over nothing and slowing us down." His eyes moved toward the rear vehicle where Reyes was climbing into her position. Marsh followed his gaze, but said nothing, turning back to his own vehicle and issuing final movement orders over the radio. The engines started in sequence, diesel rumble filling the staging area as the patrol prepared to roll out. Reyes settled in her seat, checking her medical pack one final time and ensuring her rifle was within easy reach. The vehicle lurched forward as the convoy began moving, dust billowing up from the tires as they headed toward the main gate. Through the window, she could see the mountains in the distance, the valley cutting through them like a scar. The route would take them directly through terrain she had studied the night before, reviewing casualty reports and incident logs that dated back 6 months. 3 separate IED strikes had occurred within a 2-kilometer stretch of Route Tampa, with ambushes coordinating with the explosions in 2 of those incidents. The pattern suggested enemy forces had established the area as a consistent target zone, but her mention of it during the morning briefing had been dismissed as overcautious analysis. The convoy cleared the gate and accelerated onto the hardpack road, the mountains growing larger as they approached. Reyes adjusted her position to maintain visibility through multiple windows, her training pushing her to maintain awareness of all possible threat directions. The extra tourniquets in the vehicle compartment represented a calculated risk, the kind of decision that would either be forgotten or become evidence depending on what happened in the next 2 hours. The morning briefing room at FOB Leatherneck held 24 Marines seated in rows of folding chairs, the air conditioning unit rattling against the plywood walls. Lieutenant Marsh stood at the front beside a large map display, his pointer tracing the patrol route, while Staff Sergeant Vickers sat in the front row with his arms crossed. Reyes occupied a seat near the back, her notebook open on her lap as Marsh outlined the mission parameters. "We'll be moving through this sector here," Marsh said, tapping Route Tampa on the map. "Intelligence shows minimal activity. Standard patrol protocols apply. Questions?" Reyes raised her hand, waiting for Marsh to acknowledge her. "Lieutenant, this route passes through a corridor that's seen 3 separate IED incidents in the past 6 months. 2 of those were coordinated with small arms ambushes. Should we consider an alternate route or request additional ISR coverage?" The room went quiet as heads turned toward her. Vickers shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening before he spoke up without waiting for Marsh to respond. "Corporal Reyes, every route in this province has seen incidents. That's why we're here. Are you suggesting we avoid every road that's ever had contact?" "I'm suggesting we acknowledge the pattern," Reyes said, keeping her voice level. 3 incidents in 6 months in one specific 2-kilometer stretch indicates enemy forces have established it as a target zone. We could shift our route north by 4 kilometers and still accomplish the mission objectives." Vickers stood, turning to face her directly. "What you're suggesting is that we run scared from every threat assessment that crosses your desk. This is combat, Corporal. We don't have the luxury of being overly cautious every time someone gets nervous about doing their job." Several Marines glanced between Vickers and Reyes, but no one spoke. Marsh's expression remained neutral as he looked at his tablet, reviewing the route data before addressing the room. "The current route is approved by battalion. We maintain our planned movement. Anything else?" The briefing continued for another 10 minutes, covering communications protocols and contingency procedures. Reyes made notes in her margins, marking the specific locations where previous incidents had occurred and calculating response times from different positions. When Marsh dismissed the group, the Marines filed out in clusters, their conversations resuming as they headed toward the staging area. Vickers remained behind, standing near the map with 2 other NCOs from his section. Reyes heard his voice as she gathered her notebook, the words carrying clearly despite his attempt to keep the conversation private. "This is exactly what I've been talking about. Diversity quotas, putting weak links in combat roles. She's scared of her own shadow, and now she's trying to make everyone else as cautious as she is." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez from 2nd Platoon frowned, his arms crossed as he leaned against the wall. She raised a legitimate tactical concern based on documented patterns. "That's not being scared. That's being thorough." Vickers shook his head, his frustration evident in his posture. "It's being afraid to do the job. We can't operate effectively if every corporal with a laptop starts second-guessing command decisions because they don't have the stomach for risk. This is why women shouldn't be in combat roles. They don't have the temperament for it. The other NCO, Sergeant Mills, nodded slowly. I hear you, but her service record is clean. Top marks in medical training, expert qualification on a rifle range. The paperwork doesn't suggest any performance issues. Paperwork doesn't show you what happens under pressure, Vickers said. I watch her for 3 weeks now. She overthinks everything, questions decisions, can't commit to action without analyzing it to death. When contact happens, that hesitation is going to get people killed. Reyes stood in the doorway, having heard enough of the conversation to understand its direction. She stepped into the hallway and walked toward the barracks, her grip tight on her notebook. The pattern had become clear over the past 3 weeks. Any caution she expressed was labeled as fear, any thorough preparation was called overthinking, and any question she raised was treated as evidence she lacked the temperament for her role. In her quarters, she opened her laptop and pulled up the incident database for their area of operations. The 3 IED strikes along Route Tampa had occurred at intervals of 63 days, 47 days, and 51 days. The current gap was 58 days, placing them within the enemy's established pattern window. Each previous attack had targeted convoys moving through the narrow valley section where the road curved between 2 elevated positions, providing ideal ambush geometry. She documented her analysis in her personal log, including the specific grid coordinates and the calculated probability based on the temporal and spatial patterns. If something happened during the patrol and questions were asked later, at least there would be a record that someone had identified the risk. The entry wouldn't change the mission, but it might matter in the investigation that would follow casualties. Her phone buzzed with a message from Kowalski. Hey, for what it's worth, I think you were right to bring up the route thing. Don't let Vickers get in your head. Reyes typed a brief response thanking him, but didn't elaborate. Kowalski meant well, but he hadn't spoken up during the briefing when his voice might have made a difference. Support offered privately did nothing to change the dynamic that had been established, where her assessments were dismissed while identical observations from male Marines were treated as valid tactical input. She reviewed the casualty data from the previous incidents, noting the types of injuries sustained and the time windows before medical evacuation arrived. The average wait time had been 19 minutes, with the longest being 27 minutes when weather delayed the helicopters. During those windows, 3 Marines had died from blood loss that might have been preventable with immediate intervention. The blood expanders she had wanted to carry would have provided exactly that intervention capability. 2 hours later, Reyes stood in the vehicle staging area going through her final equipment checks. The extra tourniquets were already secured in the rear compartment, hidden among the standard medical supplies where they wouldn't draw attention during Vickers' inspection. Her pack sat at regulation weight now, the removed blood expanders still bothering her like a missing piece in a critical system. Marsh walked past, reviewing his tablet one final time before the convoy departed. He glanced at her briefly, his expression unreadable, before continuing toward the lead vehicle. Whatever tactical concerns he might have shared privately, he had made clear during the briefing that the mission would proceed as planned. The chain of command had spoken, and now the only variable that mattered was whether the enemy's pattern would hold or break in their favor. The vehicle staging area buzzed with activity as the patrol team conducted final preparations. Reyes checked her medical pack one last time, verifying each item's placement by touch rather than sight. The muscle memory from hundreds of drills allowed her to confirm inventory in seconds. Airways, chest seals, hemostatic gauze, pressure bandages for kits. Everything sat in its designated pocket, ready for immediate access. Vickers approached with his clipboard, moving down the line of Marines as they prepared their gear. When he reached Reyes, his eyes moved from her regulation weight pack to the open rear compartment of the Humvee where additional medical supplies were stored. He gestured toward the vehicle with his pen. You're in the rear vehicle, Corporal, tail end Charlie position. That way if we need to move fast through any situation, you won't slow down the front elements. Reyes nodded without comment, understanding the assignment for what it represented. Placing her in the rear vehicle physically separated her from the main patrol leadership, ensuring her presence wouldn't interfere with Vickers's command decisions. The positioning also meant she would be last to arrive at any situation requiring medical intervention, a tactical choice that contradicted standard doctrine for medic placement. Staff Sergeant, shouldn't the medic be positioned mid-convoy for optimal response time to casualties in either direction? Vickers's expression hardened. I'm not interested in your opinion on tactical positioning. Corporal, get in your assigned vehicle and prepare to roll out. He moved to the next Marine without waiting for acknowledgement. Reyes climbed into the rear Humvee, settling into her seat and securing her equipment. Through the windshield, she could see the 3 vehicles ahead in the convoy formation, their crews conducting final radio checks and weapon status verification. Marine Shun from 2nd Squad approached the rear vehicle, tossing his pack onto the seat beside Reyes. He was assigned as her vehicle companion, along with their driver, Lance Corporal Williams, and the vehicle commander, Sergeant Harris. Chin pulled out his personal medical kit, a small pouch containing basic first aid supplies that every Marine carried. Reyes noticed the minimal contents as Chin opened it for inspection. Your kit's light. You should carry at least 2 more tourniquets and additional quick clot. If you take a hit and I can't reach you immediately, you'll need to self-treat. Chun shrugged, zipping the pouch closed. Real Marines travel light, Corporal. I'm not loading myself down with extra weight for situations that probably won't happen. Besides, that's what you're here for, right? Harris climbed into the vehicle commander position, adjusting his headset and checking the radio connection to the other vehicles. If something goes wrong, he said without looking at either of them, the medic handles it. That's the whole point of having one assigned. Chin doesn't need to carry a mini hospital. Reyes opened her pack and pulled out 2 tourniquets and a package of hemostatic gauze. She held them toward Chun. Take these anyway. Store them in your vest pockets where you can reach them with either hand. I'm asking as your medic, not ordering as your NCO. Chin hesitated, glancing at Harris before accepting the supplies. He tucked them into his vest pockets without further comment. Williams started the engine, the diesel rumble vibrating through the vehicle frame as the convoy prepared for departure. Lieutenant Marsh's voice came through the radio, his tone professional and measured. All vehicles, comms check. Report status. Each vehicle commander responded in sequence, confirming their readiness. Harris keyed his mic last. Vehicle 4, good copy. All systems green. Roger, Vehicle 4, Marsh replied. QRF is currently 18 minutes response time from our patrol sector. All vehicles maintain 50-meter dispersal intervals. We roll in 2 minutes. Kowalski appeared at Reyes's window, his rifle slung across his chest. He leaned close enough that his voice wouldn't carry to the other vehicles. Look, I know Vickers is riding you hard. For what it's worth, some of us think you're actually pretty solid at your job. I've seen your record. Top 5% of your class, expert marksman qualification. That's not diversity quota stuff. That's just good performance. Reyes met his eyes through the window. Then why didn't you say that during the briefing when it might have mattered? Kowalski's expression shifted, discomfort crossing his features. Because Vickers is my section leader, and I've got 2 more years in this unit. I can't afford to have him think I'm undermining his authority. So you agree with me privately, but won't support me publicly. That's very helpful, Kowalski. He stepped back from the window, his jaw tight. I'm just trying to survive my deployment without making enemies. Same as everyone else. The lead vehicle began moving, dust kicking up from its tires as it headed toward the main gate. The convoy formation tightened, each vehicle taking its position at the prescribed interval. Reyes watched Kowalski return to his vehicle, his words echoing in her mind as they joined the patrol movement. Williams guided their Humvee into position, maintaining the 50-meter gap behind the 3rd vehicle. The FOB gate opened ahead, and the convoy accelerated onto Route Tampa. The mountains loomed larger as they approached, the valley cutting through the terrain like a natural funnel. Reyes studied the elevated positions on either side, noting the countless locations that could conceal an observer or a weapons team. Harris pulled up the mission map on his tablet, reviewing the waypoints they would hit during the patrol loop. His finger traced the route through the valley section, the same 2-kilometer stretch where previous incidents had occurred. We'll be through this section in about 20 minutes. Intelligence says it's clear, so we should have a quiet run. Chun adjusted his rifle, checking the magazine seating for the third time. You worried about something, Reyes? You keep staring at those ridge lines like you're expecting something. Reyes pulled her attention back to the vehicle interior. Just maintaining situational awareness. That's what we're trained to do. The convoy maintained steady progress along the hardpack road, the interval between vehicles remaining consistent as they moved deeper into the valley. Marsh's voice periodically came through the radio with position updates and navigation confirmations. The routine nature of the communications suggested a patrol proceeding exactly as planned, with no indicators of threat or deviation from standard operations. Reyes checked her watch, calculating the time until they would reach the high-stress section of the route. 14 minutes at current speed. She verified her rifle's safety position and confirmed her medical pack remained within immediate reach. The extra tourniquets in the vehicle compartment behind her represented a small insurance policy, the kind that would either never be needed or prove absolutely critical depending on what the next 20 minutes held. The lead vehicle disappeared around a curve in the valley road, the dust from its tires hanging in the still air. Williams maintained a 50-meter interval as their Humvee followed the same path, the mountains rising steeply on both sides. Reyes kept her eyes moving between the ridgelines, scanning for movement or the glint of metal that might betray an observer position. The explosion came without warning, a massive blast that lifted the front end of the lead vehicle and sent debris arcing through the air. The shockwave hit Reyes's Humvee a second later, rattling the frame and cracking the windshield. Williams slammed the brakes as Harris grabbed his radio, shouting into the handset while the smoke from the blast obscured the road ahead. Contact, contact, IED on lead vehicle. Harris's voice competed with the sudden eruption of automatic weapons fire that poured down from the elevated positions on both sides of the valley. Rounds snapped through the air and sparked off vehicle armor. The distinctive crack of AK-47s mixing with the heavier rhythm of machine gun fire. Through the settling dust, Reyes could see the lead vehicle tilted at an angle, its front axle destroyed and the hood torn open. Marines scrambled from the disabled truck, taking cover behind the engine block as enemy fire concentrated on their position. The second and third vehicles in the convoy had stopped short of the kill zone, their crews returning fire toward the ridgelines. Marsh's voice came through the radio, strained but controlled. All vehicles, suppress fire on elevated positions. QRF is notified, 18 minutes out. Chun pressed himself against the vehicle frame as rounds hammered their position. The enemy had perfect fields of fire from the high ground, and the convoy sat exposed on the open road with minimal cover. Williams tried backing the vehicle to create distance, but Harris stopped him with a sharp command. Hold position. We can't leave the lead vehicle exposed. Reyes counted muzzle flashes from the rocks above, tracking at least 8 separate firing positions spread across both ridgelines. The ambush had been carefully planned, with the IED positioned to disable the lead vehicle exactly where the valley narrowed and escape routes were limited. Every tactical concern she had raised during the briefing was now manifesting in real time, but recognition of her accuracy provided no satisfaction as Marines screamed for help through the radio chaos. Vickers's voice cut through the frequency, commanding and absolute. All elements, hold your positions and maintain suppressing fire. Medic, stay in your vehicle until we establish fire superiority. Chun grabbed his throat, his eyes going wide as blood spurted between his fingers. A round had punched through a gap in the vehicle armor, catching him in the side of his neck. He tried to speak, but only made a wet, gurgling sound as the blood flow increased. Reyes moved immediately, shoving her pack aside and grabbing Chin's shoulder to turn him toward her. She pulled one of the tourniquets from his vest pocket, the one she had given him minutes earlier, but the wound location made it useless. Tourniquets stopped limb bleeds, not neck wounds. She pressed her hand directly against the injury, applying pressure while digging through her pack for hemostatic gauze with her other hand. Harris twisted in his seat, seeing the blood covering Chun and Reyes's hands. How bad? Femoral artery level bleed, but on his neck. 3 minutes before he loses consciousness. Maybe 4 before it's irreversible. Can you stabilize him here? Reyes packed the wound with gauze, her fingers working despite the continued gunfire rattling against their vehicle. Not with this wound location. He needs surgical intervention that I can't provide. But I can keep him alive if I maintain pressure. More voices flooded the radio as the firefight intensified. The third vehicle reported that Harris and second squad, a different Harris, had taken rounds through his arm and couldn't reach his tourniquet. His screams pierced through the radio static, describing the arterial spray that he couldn't stop with only one functional limb. Vickers transmitted again, his tone unchanged. All elements maintain your positions. QRF is 15 minutes out. Medic, hold in place until we can establish security. Reyes looked at Chun, whose face had gone pale as she maintained pressure on his neck wound. Then she glanced toward the front vehicles where Harris's screams continued. Both Marines were bleeding out, and in 15 minutes they would both be dead. The QRF would arrive to recover bodies instead of casualties. She keyed her radio, speaking clearly despite the rounds impacting around their vehicle. Reyes moving to casualties. I have 2 Marines with arterial bleeds who will be dead before QRF arrives. Vickers's response was immediate and furious. Corporal Reyes, I gave you a direct order to hold position. Do not leave that vehicle. Staff Sergeant, Chun is losing blood at a rate that gives him 3 more minutes of consciousness. Harris is screaming that he can't apply his own tourniquet. I'm a combat medic. Keeping me away from dying Marines because of suppressing fire doctrine is getting them killed. You stay in that vehicle. Corporal, that is a direct order. Reyes looked at Chun, whose eyes were starting to lose focus despite the pressure she maintained on his neck. She calculated distances and angles, mapping the route she would need to take to reach both casualties while using the terrain and vehicles for cover. The drainage ditch that ran alongside the road provided a low route that enemy fire couldn't easily reach. She grabbed her medical pack and pulled out 2 grenades from the vehicle's equipment locker. Harris stared at her, understanding crossing his features as she prepared to exit. You're disobeying a direct order. I'm doing my job. Keep pressure on Chin's neck exactly where my hand is. Press hard and don't let up. Reyes keyed her radio one final time, her voice calm. Reyes moving to casualties. Vehicle 4, do not suppress fire on Sector 3. That's my approach route. She opened the door and dropped into the ditch before Vickers could respond, his shouted commands fading as she low-crawled toward the kill zone. The smoke from the IED blast still hung in the air, providing partial concealment as she used every depression and rock for cover. Enemy rounds snapped overhead, but she was below their line of fire, moving through the dead space their elevated positions couldn't effectively target. The drainage ditch brought her within 40 meters of Chin's position near the destroyed lead vehicle. She could see him curled behind the wheel, his left arm hanging at an unnatural angle with blood pooling beneath him. His screams had stopped, replaced by the shock of blood loss that would kill him in minutes if she couldn't reach him and apply a tourniquet. Reyes pulled the pin on her first grenade and threw it toward the nearest enemy position, the explosion drawing fire away from her location for precious seconds. She used the window to sprint across open ground, sliding behind the lead vehicle's engine block as rounds sparked off the metal above her head. Chun looked at her with unfocused eyes, his breathing shallow and rapid. She grabbed his mangled arm, finding the source of the arterial spray and applying a tourniquet high and tight. The bleeding stopped as she cinched it down. Then she pushed a blood expander 4 into his good arm, the one she wasn't supposed to be carrying, the extra weight that Vickers had called unnecessary. Chen's eyes cleared slightly as the fluid entered his system. How bad? Bad enough. But you're stable now. Stay down and don't move. 25 meters beyond Chen's position, Harris continued to scream. Harris's screams cut through the gunfire, his voice raw with pain and panic as he described the blood pumping from his mangled left arm. Reyes could see him pinned behind a boulder 25 meters deeper into the kill zone, exposed to multiple enemy firing positions. The radio chatter confirmed what her ears already told her. He had taken shrapnel through his arm and couldn't reach his tourniquet with his remaining functional hand. Vickers's voice filled the radio frequency, commanding and furious. "Corporal Reyes, return to your vehicle immediately. I will have you court-martialed for this." Reyes ignored the transmission, her attention fixed on the tactical problem in front of her. Harris's position sat in the worst possible location, directly exposed to the elevated enemy positions with minimal cover. The Marines providing suppressing fire were doing their best, but the enemy had superior angles and could maintain pressure on anyone trying to move through that space. She keyed her radio, speaking clearly despite the chaos. "All vehicles, I need concentrated fire on the eastern ridgeline positions for 8 seconds. On my mark." "Who the hell authorized you to direct fire?" Vickers demanded. "The Marine bleeding to death authorized it, Staff Sergeant." "Fire on Eastern Ridge in 3, 2, 1, mark." The volume of outgoing fire increased dramatically as multiple vehicles concentrated their weapons on the eastern positions. Enemy fire slackened as the fighters ducked behind cover, giving Reyes the window she needed. She pulled her second grenade, threw it toward a flanking position, and sprinted toward Harris the moment the explosion sounded. Rounds snapped through the air around her, but she used the smoke and suppressing fire to cross the exposed ground in seconds. She slid behind Harris's boulder, her shoulder slamming into the rock as enemy fire resumed. Harris looked at her with eyes that showed too much white, his right hand pressed uselessly against his shredded left arm as blood pumped between his fingers. "The artery's torn," he gasped. "I can't stop it. I can't reach my tourniquet." Reyes grabbed his left arm, finding the source of the arterial spray above his elbow. The shrapnel had mangled the limb badly, tearing through muscle and vessel in a way that made tourniquet application difficult. She pulled one of her own tourniquets, positioning it as high as possible on his arm and cranking the windlass tight. The spray diminished, but didn't stop completely. "Hold still." She grabbed hemostatic gauze and packed the wound aggressively, her fingers working despite the continued gunfire hammering their position. The combination of tourniquet and packing finally stopped the bleeding. Though Harris's blood pressure had dropped dangerously low from the volume he had already lost. She pushed in 4 line into his right arm, the blood expander flowing into his system as she secured the line. Harris's breathing remained rapid and shallow, his body trying to compensate for the blood loss through increased heart rate and respiration. The 4 would help, but he needed surgical intervention soon or the damage would become irreversible. "Can you move?" she asked. Harris tried to stand, but his legs wouldn't support his weight. The blood loss had weakened him too much for independent movement. Reyes looked at the terrain between their position and better cover, calculating the exposure time and the likelihood of taking fire during the movement. "All vehicles, I need another suppression window on Eastern Ridge. 10 seconds this time. Preparing to move casualty." Vickers's voice returned, but the anger had shifted to something else. "Reyes, QRF is 12 minutes out. Can you hold position?" "Negative, Staff Sergeant. Harris needs to be moved to cover with better protection. I can get him there, but I need that suppression window." A different voice cut into the frequency, calmer and more measured. Lieutenant Marsh speaking. "All vehicles, prepare to suppress Eastern Ridge on Corporal Reyes's mark. Reyes will give you the window you need." She positioned herself beside Harris, getting her shoulder under his right arm to support his weight. His left arm hung useless at his side, the tourniquet and packing holding, but the limb itself compromised beyond field repair. She keyed her radio one final time. "Suppression window in 3, 2, 1, mark." The gunfire intensified again as every Marine in the convoy directed their weapons toward the eastern positions. Reyes lifted Harris and began moving, half carrying him toward the lead vehicle's position where Chun and the other casualties had better cover. The distance was only 15 meters, but carrying Harris's weight while staying low made it feel like 100. Rounds impacted around them, kicking up dirt and sparking off rocks as enemy fighters adjusted their aim. Harris groaned with each jarring step, his consciousness fading as his body struggled with the trauma and blood loss. Reyes pushed forward, her legs burning as she maintained the awkward carry position while presenting the smallest possible target. They reached the lead vehicle and collapsed behind its bulk, the engine block providing solid cover from the eastern ridge fire. Chin was still conscious, his neck wound stable under the field dressing another Marine had maintained. Harris slumped beside him, his breathing ragged but steady enough to indicate he would survive if the QRF arrived soon. Reyes pulled out another blood expander and started a second four in Harris, maximizing his fluid replacement. Her hands shook slightly now that the immediate crisis had passed, adrenaline catching up with her as the reality of what she had just done settled in. She had disobeyed a direct order, moved through a kill zone under fire, and treated two critical casualties using techniques and supplies that Vickers had specifically told her were unnecessary. Marsh's voice came through the radio, directed specifically at her position. "Corporal Reyes, status on casualties? Chun is stable with neck wound, controlled bleeding. Harris is stable with tourniquet on mangled left arm and 2 liters of blood expander in him. Both will survive if QRF arrives in the next 10 minutes. Copy that. Outstanding work, Corporal. QRF is 9 minutes out." Kowalski appeared at the edge of the lead vehicle's cover, having left his own position to cross the open ground. He dropped beside Reyes, his rifle trained on the eastern ridge as he provided additional security. He glanced at the 2 stabilized casualties, then at Reyes. "That was the craziest thing I've ever seen anyone do," he said. "You know Vickers is going to bury you for this." Reyes checked Chin's neck dressing, ensuring the bleeding remained controlled. "Maybe, but these 2 Marines will be alive to testify about it." The enemy fire began to slacken as the fighters recognized their ambush had failed to achieve its objective. The convoy had taken casualties but maintained its defensive position, and the approaching sound of helicopters signaled that reinforcements were close. The tactical situation had shifted from desperate defense to holding ground until extraction. Vickers's voice returned to the radio, addressing the entire convoy. "All elements, maintain positions and continue suppressing fire. QRF is 7 minutes out. Good work holding the line." He didn't mention Reyes specifically, and his tone suggested their confrontation was far from over. But for the moment, the immediate crisis had passed. 2 Marines who should have bled to death in the dirt were breathing and stable, their survival dependent on a medic who had refused to follow orders when those orders would have killed her patients. Reyes sat with her back against the vehicle, her medical pack nearly empty and her hands still covered in blood. The extra tourniquets, the blood expanders, the supplies that Vickers had called unnecessary had all been used. The weight she had been told not to carry had saved lives. Sometimes being right mattered less than being prepared, and in combat, preparation was the only thing that separated casualties from body bags. The sound of helicopter rotors grew louder as the QRF approached from the south, their distinctive rhythm cutting through the diminishing gunfire. Reyes maintained her position beside Chun and Harris, checking their vitals every 30 seconds to ensure neither casualty deteriorated while they waited for extraction. Chin's neck wound remained stable under the pressure dressing, his color improving slightly as the blood expander worked through his system. Harris drifted in and out of consciousness, his mangled arm secured and his blood pressure holding at minimally acceptable levels. Enemy fire had dropped to sporadic shots as the fighters on the ridgelines recognized their tactical advantage was collapsing. The approaching helicopters carried enough firepower to eliminate their positions entirely, and the ambush that had seemed so perfectly executed was now turning into a potential trap for the attackers themselves. Reyes could see movement on the eastern ridge as fighters began withdrawing, abandoning their carefully prepared positions. Kowalski remained beside her, his rifle trained on the ridgeline as he provided security. "You're going to be famous after this," he said without taking his eyes off the terrain. "Or court-martialed. Maybe both." Reyes adjusted Harris's foreline, ensuring the flow remained steady. "I did my job. That's all that matters. You disobeyed a direct order from your NCO in the middle of combat. That's not going to disappear just because it worked out. The helicopters came into view, two Apache gunships providing overhead security while a Black Hawk descended toward the cleared landing zone the convoy had established. The Apache pilots immediately engaged the remaining enemy positions, their 30mm cannons tearing into the rocks where muzzle flashes still flickered. The enemy fire ceased entirely as the remaining fighters fled or were eliminated. The Black Hawk touched down in a storm of rotor wash and dust, its crew chief and medic jumping out before the skids fully settled. They ran toward the lead vehicle with a stretcher, their movements practiced and efficient. Reyes stood to brief them on the casualties, her voice carrying over the helicopter noise. Two critical, both stabilized. Chun has a neck wound with controlled bleeding, tourniquet applied at 0942 hours. Harris has a tourniquet on his left arm with extensive tissue damage, 2 liters of blood expander administered. Both received initial treatment approximately 8 minutes ago. The QRF medic, a staff sergeant with a combat medical badge, knelt beside Harris and checked the tourniquet application. Good work on this. Textbook placement under difficult conditions. He moved to Chun and examined the neck dressing. This should have killed him. How did you control the bleeding with this wound location? Direct pressure and hemostatic packing. I maintained compression for 4 minutes until the clotting agents could take effect. The staff sergeant looked at her directly, his expression showing professional respect. You saved both these Marines. No question about it. His team loaded Harris onto the stretcher while another crew member helped Chun to his feet, supporting him as they moved toward the helicopter. Captain Rodriguez emerged from the Black Hawk, his rank insignia marking him as the QRF commander. He surveyed the ambush site with tactical precision, taking in the disabled lead vehicle, the defensive positions the convoy had established, and the ridgelines where enemy positions smoldered from Apache fire. His eyes settled on the terrain between the lead vehicle and the position where Harris had been trapped. Who moved through that kill zone to reach the casualties? He asked. Vickers had approached from the second vehicle, his uniform dusty and his expression controlled. Corporal Reyes is our combat medic, sir. She conducted the casualty treatment. Rodriguez walked to the position where Harris had been pinned, examining the sight lines and fields of fire. Then he looked back at the lead vehicle, calculating the distance and exposure. You moved through this space under fire to reach him? Reyes met his gaze. Yes, sir. He couldn't apply his own tourniquet and was bleeding from severed artery. The time window required immediate action. The captain turned to Vickers. What was your order to the medic during the engagement? Staff Sergeant. Vickers's jaw tightened. I ordered all personnel to maintain their positions until QRF arrival, sir. Standard defensive protocol for an ambush situation. And the medic disobeyed that order? She left her vehicle against my direct command and moved into the kill zone. Rodriguez looked at the blood-soaked ground where Harris had been trapped, then at the trail of blood leading back to the lead vehicle. Staff Sergeant, how long was QRF response time from initial contact? 18 minutes from a call, sir. We arrived approximately 9 minutes after the medic reached the casualties. Rodriguez pulled out a tablet and began making notes. So the casualties received treatment 9 minutes before medical evacuation arrived. What was their condition when your medic reached them? The QRF staff sergeant responded before Vickers could speak. Sir, based on the blood loss at the scene and the wound characteristics, both Marines would have been deceased or irreversibly damaged before we arrived. The field treatment kept them alive. The captain continued his documentation, his questions methodical and thorough. Corporal Reyes, walk me through your tactical movement. How did you cross that exposed ground without taking casualties yourself? Reyes described the drainage ditch approach, the use of smoke and suppressing fire, and the grenade employment that created movement windows. Rodriguez listened without interruption, occasionally making notes or asking for clarification on timing or positioning. His questions focused on tactical decision-making rather than chain of command issues. When she finished, he looked at Vickers. Staff Sergeant, why was the medic positioned in the rear vehicle? Vickers maintained his composure despite the direction of questioning. I assessed that position would provide optimal security for our medical asset while maintaining response capability, sir. But it placed her furthest from casualties in any engagement with the front elements. That was an acceptable risk based on the intelligence assessment of low threat probability for this route, sir. Rodriguez made another note. Intelligence assessment that turned out to be inaccurate. Corporal Reyes, did you have concerns about this route before the patrol? Reyes hesitated, recognizing the political minefield the question represented. I identified a pattern of incidents along this specific section during mission planning, sir. I raised the concern during our briefing. And how was that concern addressed? It was determined to be overcautious analysis, and the route was approved as planned, sir. The captain closed his tablet and looked at the ambush site one final time. Staff Sergeant Vickers, I'm going to need detailed statements from you and your Marines regarding this engagement. Corporal Reyes, the same applies to you. This incident will require a formal review given the nature of the tactical decisions involved. Understood, Sir, Vickers said. Rodriguez turned to head back to his helicopter, but paused. Corporal, one more question. The blood expanders you used on the casualties. Those are above standard loadout for a combat medikit. Where did you get them? Reyes met his eyes. I carried them as additional supplies, sir. I believe the extended response time in this terrain warranted extra blood replacement capability, even though that put you over regulation weight limits? Yes, sir. I assessed that the capability was more important than the weight restriction. The captain nodded slowly. That assessment saved 2 lives today. Remember that when you're writing your statement. He walked back to the Black Hawk, which lifted off moments later with Chun and Harris secure inside. Vickers stood beside the damaged lead vehicle, watching the helicopter disappear toward the FOB. His expression remained neutral, but his posture carried tension that suggested their confrontation was merely postponed rather than resolved. The ambush site fell quiet except for the Marines conducting security sweeps and the sounds of equipment being redistributed for the convoy's return movement. Reyes gathered her depleted medical supplies, her hands moving through the familiar ritual of restocking and reorganization. The extra tourniquets were gone, the blood expanders were used, and the supplies Vickers had called unnecessary had proven their worth in the most definitive way possible. But she understood that being right would not necessarily protect her from the consequences of disobedience, and the investigation Rodriguez had promised would examine every decision made during those critical minutes. Captain Rodriguez sat in the operations center at FOB Leatherneck 12 hours after the ambush, reviewing helmet camera footage from 4 different Marines who had been part of the patrol. The screen showed multiple angles of the engagement, capturing the IED blast, the initial chaos, and the subsequent firefight from various perspectives. He paused the footage at the moment Reyes emerged from her vehicle, watching her movement through the drainage ditch with tactical precision that impressed him. Lieutenant Park entered the operations center carrying a stack of personnel files and incident reports. She was the battalion intelligence officer, assigned to assist Rodriguez with the formal inquiry into the engagement. Her role focused on pattern analysis and tactical assessment rather than individual performance evaluation, but the 2 aspects were deeply intertwined in this case. Sir, I've pulled the relevant files you requested. Park spread the documents across the table beside the monitors. Corporal Reyes's complete service record, the patrol mission brief, intelligence assessments for Route Tampa over the past 6 months, and incident reports from previous contacts in that sector. Rodriguez picked up Reyes's personnel file, scanning through her training records and performance evaluations. Expert rifle qualification, top 5% of her medical training class, commendations from 2 previous deployments. The official record painted a picture of exceptional competence. Then he found Vickers's evaluation from 3 weeks earlier. Corporal Reyes struggles with high-stress decision-making and demonstrates overcautious tendencies that could compromise unit effectiveness in combat situations. Recommend reassignment to administrative medical duties where her detail-oriented approach would be better utilized. Rodriguez read the passage twice, then looked at Park. Does this match what we observe in the footage? Park shook her head. The helmet cam shows her making rapid tactical decisions under direct fire. She employed smoke, terrain, and suppressing fire coordination to move through an active kill zone. That's not overcautious behavior. That's advanced infantry tactics executed by a medical specialist. Rodriguez set the evaluation aside and pulled up the patrol mission brief on his tablet. Walk me through the pre-mission planning. What concerns were raised? Park opened her laptop and accessed the mission log. During the briefing, Corporal Reyes identified a pattern of IED and ambush incidents along a specific 2-kilometer section of Route Tampa. She recommended alternate routing or additional ISR coverage. The concern was logged but dismissed as overcautious analysis. How accurate was her pattern identification? Park pulled up a map showing incident locations over 6 months. The ambush occurred exactly within the zone she identified. 3 previous incidents in the same area, at intervals averaging 53 days. Yesterday's attack was 58 days after the last incident. Her analysis was accurate. Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, processing the information. So we have a medic who accurately predicted the ambush location, was told she was being overcautious, then saved 2 Marines when that ambush occurred exactly as she suggested it might. Park nodded. Additionally, sir, the blood expanders she used were specifically flagged by Staff Sergeant Vickers as unnecessary weight during gear inspection. According to the QRF medic's report, those expanders were critical to keeping both casualties alive until evacuation arrived. The captain pulled up footage from Kowalski's helmet camera, watching Reyes work on Harris while under fire. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, no hesitation or fumbling despite rounds impacting around her position. He noted the time stamps. Tourniquet applied in 11 seconds. Hemostatic packing completed in 34 seconds. For line established in 19 seconds. The numbers represented training executed flawlessly under maximum stress. I want to interview the other Marines who were on that patrol. Start with Kowalski. He had the best view of her movement through the kill zone. Park made a note. I'll have him here in 20 minutes. Sir, there's another element you should be aware of. I pulled the complaint logs for Vickers' unit over the past 3 months. Rodriguez looked up from the footage. And? 6 informal complaints from female Marines about dismissive treatment or having their tactical input ignored. None were formal enough to trigger investigation, but the pattern is documented. Reyes herself logged concerns about her suggestions being systematically rejected, though she never filed an official complaint. The pattern was becoming clearer, and Rodriguez found it disturbing. A competent medic was being undermined by her direct superior. Her accurate tactical assessments were dismissed, and her life-saving medical decisions were characterized as evidence of poor judgment. The ambush had forced the truth into the open, but how many previous situations had been affected by the same dynamic? 20 minutes later, Kowalski sat across from Rodriguez in the operations center, still wearing his dusty uniform from the patrol. The Marine's posture was tense, clearly uncomfortable with being questioned by Captain. Park sat beside Rodriguez, taking notes while he conducted the interview. Lance Corporal Kowalski, I want you to describe what you observed during the engagement, specifically regarding Corporal Reyes' actions. Take your time and be detailed. Kowalski cleared his throat. Sir, when the IED hit and the shooting started, everything was chaos. Chun in our vehicle took a round to the neck, and Reyes treated him immediately. She stabilized him fast, maybe 2 minutes total. Then Harris and Second Squad started screaming about not being able to stop his bleeding. Rodriguez nodded. What happened next? Staff Sergeant Vickers ordered everyone to hold positions, including Reyes. He told her to stay in the vehicle until QRF arrived, but she assessed that Harris would bleed out before QRF got there. She told Vickers she was moving to the casualty. How did Vickers respond? He ordered her to stand down, sir. Direct order. She ignored it and moved anyway. Did you think her decision was correct? Kowalski hesitated, then spoke carefully. Sir, I watched her move through that kill zone using terrain and timing like an infantry marine. She wasn't reckless. She coordinated suppressing fire, used smoke, employed grenades to create movement windows. When she reached Harris, She had him stabilized in under a minute. Without her, he would have died. That's not opinion. That's fact based on the blood loss at his position. Rodriguez made notes while Park pulled up the relevant footage. What was your impression of Corporal Reyes before this engagement? Kowalski shifted in his chair. Honestly, sir, most of us thought she was solid. Her record speaks for itself. But Vickers had been vocal about questioning her judgment, so nobody wanted to publicly disagree with him. Why not? He's our section leader, sir. Disagreeing with him publicly would have made our lives difficult for the rest of the deployment. I know that sounds weak, but that's the reality. Rodriguez leaned forward. During the mission brief, Reyes raised concerns about the route. Do you remember that? Yes, sir. She identified the section where the ambush happened as high risk based on previous incidents. Vickers has shut her down pretty hard, said she was being overcautious. What was your assessment of her concern at the time? I thought she was probably right, sir. But again, I didn't say anything. The captain closed his notebook. Thank you, Lance Corporal. That'll be all for now. You may return to your unit. After Kowalski left, Park pulled up additional footage showing the moment Reyes coordinated fire with the other vehicles to create suppression windows. The tactical radio chatter revealed a medic directing infantry fire with precision that suggested training well beyond her medical specialty. Sir Rodriguez, she wasn't just treating casualties. She was directing defensive fire and coordinating tactical movements. That's not in a medic's standard skill set. Rodriguez pulled up Reyes's training record again. Advanced Combat Lifesaver Course, Combat Infantry Tactics Elective, Close Quarters Battle Training. She took every advanced course available to her. This wasn't accident or instinct. This was deliberate preparation meeting opportunity. Park highlighted several sections in Vickers' evaluation. Every positive capability she demonstrated during the ambush is characterized negatively in this assessment. Thorough preparation is called overcautious. Tactical analysis is labeled as overthinking. The evaluation appears designed to undermine rather than assess. Rodriguez stood and walked to the window overlooking the base. The investigation had revealed more than just a successful rescue under fire. It had exposed a systematic pattern of competent performance being reframed as inadequacy, accurate analysis being dismissed as fear, and professional preparation being characterized as weakness. The ambush had forced the truth into visibility, but the real question was how deeply the pattern ran throughout the unit, and whether other capable Marines had been similarly undermined. The base hospital at Camp Leatherneck maintained a sterile quiet broken only by the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the soft footsteps of medical staff. Chun lay in a recovery bed with bandages wrapped around his neck, the wound healing but still requiring careful monitoring. Harris occupied the bed beside him, his left arm secured in a complex brace that stabilized the extensive tissue damage while doctors determined whether the limb could be saved. Reyes entered the ward carrying a clipboard with follow-up treatment notes. She had been assigned to check on both Marines as part of her continuing duties, though the assignment felt strange given the circumstances. 3 days had passed since the ambush, and the investigation continued while normal base operations resumed around it. Chen looked up as she approached, his eyes brightening despite the obvious discomfort the neck wound caused him. "Hey, document. Come make sure I'm still breathing?" Reyes checked his chart, reviewing the vitals and treatment notes from the previous shift. "Something like that. How's the pain level?" "Manageable. The docs say another week, and I'll be cleared for light duty. The neck thing looks worse than it is at this point." She examined the dressing, checking for signs of infection or complications. The wound was healing cleanly, the hemostatic packing and immediate treatment having prevented the kind of damage that would require extensive surgical intervention. "You got lucky. 2 centimeters to the left, and I wouldn't have been able to stop the bleeding at all." Chen's expression sobered. "I know. The doctor told me I should have died before the QRF arrived. Said the field treatment was the only reason I'm here." Reyes made notes on the chart, keeping her professional distance despite the emotion in Chen's voice. "You would have done the same for me." "Maybe, but I was one of the guys making jokes about female Marines not understanding weight distribution. Remember that? Before the patrol, when Vickers was on you about your pack weight. I said something stupid about you overpacking. You were following your section leader's example. That's normal unit dynamics. Chin shook his head slightly, wincing at the movement. It was still wrong. You were carrying exactly what you needed to keep me alive, and I was mocking you for it. Then when you gave me those extra tourniquets and the quick clot, I took them, but I didn't really think I'd need them. I was wrong about you. Reyes moved to Harris's bed, checking his chart and examining the brace on his arm. The damage was extensive, with multiple surgeons having worked to repair the severed artery and torn muscle tissue. The prognosis remained uncertain, though the fact that Harris still had the arm at all represented a small victory. Harris was awake, but groggy from pain medication. His eyes tracked Reyes as she reviewed his treatment notes. "You saved my arm," he said, his voice rough. "Doctors said the tourniquet placement was perfect. Any lower, and I would have lost too much muscle. Any higher, and it wouldn't have stopped the bleeding. You still might lose function in that arm. The damage was severe, but I've got a chance. Without you, I'd have bled out in that dirt, and they'd be shipping me home in a box. My wife would be getting a folded flag instead of her husband. My daughter would grow up without a father." Reyes continued her examination, uncomfortable with the gratitude that felt disproportionate to her actions. "I did my job. That's what combat medics are trained to do." Harris reached out with his good hand and gripped her wrist, his hold weak but insistent. "No, you did more than your job. You disobeyed a direct order because you knew it was wrong. You moved through a kill zone under fire because waiting would have killed us. You used supplies that your NCO told you were unnecessary. Every decision you made was the right one, and every decision Vickers made would have gotten us killed." Captain Rodriguez appeared in the ward doorway, his presence commanding attention even without speaking. He waited for Reyes to finish her examination before approaching. "Corporal Reyes, I need a few minutes of your time when you're done here." She completed her notes and followed Rodriguez into a private consultation room adjacent to the ward. Lieutenant Park was already there, her laptop open and displaying what appeared to be compiled evidence from the investigation. Rodriguez gestured for Reyes to sit, his expression professional but not hostile. "Corporal, I spent the last 3 days reviewing every aspect of the engagement. Helmet camera footage, radio communications, personnel files, incident reports, and interviews with multiple Marines from your unit. I want to walk through some findings with you." Reyes sat, her posture straight despite the fatigue that 3 days of continued duty and investigation stress had accumulated. "Yes, sir." Rodriguez pulled up footage on Park's laptop showing Reyes's movement through the drainage ditch. "Your tactical movement through this kill zone demonstrates infantry-level capability. Where did you learn these techniques?" "I took every advanced combat course available through my training pipeline, sir. Close quarters battle, advanced infantry tactics, tactical leadership under fire. I believe the combat medic should have the same movement and tactical skills as the Marines she might need to reach under fire." Park highlighted several moments in the footage. "You coordinated suppressing fire from multiple vehicles, employed grenades to create movement windows, and used terrain to minimize exposure. These aren't medical skills. These are combat leadership skills. A medic who can't reach her casualties is useless, sir. I trained to ensure I could get to wounded Marines regardless of the tactical situation." Rodriguez nodded and pulled up the mission brief. "Before the patrol, you identified the ambush location as high risk based on pattern analysis. Walk me through that assessment." Reyes described the incident patterns she had identified, the temporal and spatial correlations, and the probability calculations that had informed her concern. Rodriguez and Park listened without interruption, occasionally making notes or pulling up supporting data that confirmed her analysis. "Your assessment was accurate," Rodriguez said. "The ambush occurred exactly where and approximately when your analysis suggested it might. Yet your concern was dismissed as overcautious. Why do you think that happened?" Reyes chose her words carefully. "Staff Sergeant Vickers had made clear that he believed my tendency toward thorough analysis indicated a lack of confidence in my own judgment, sir. He characterized my preparation as evidence of fear rather than professionalism." Park turned her laptop to show Vickers' evaluation of Reyes. This assessment describes you as struggling with stress and demonstrating overcautious tendencies. Does that match your self-assessment? No, ma'am. I believe thorough preparation and accurate threat assessment are fundamental to effective combat operations. What Staff Sergeant Vickers interpreted as overcaution, I would characterize as professional diligence. Rodriguez leaned forward. Corporal, I'm going to be direct with you. The evidence suggests a pattern of systematic undermining of your professional judgment by your direct superior. Your accurate tactical assessments were dismissed. Your appropriate medical preparations were criticized. Your training and performance records were mischaracterized in official evaluations. And when the situation you predicted occurred, your life-saving actions required you to disobey orders that would have resulted in preventable casualties. Reyes maintained her composure, though the summary of the situation laid out so clearly carried weight she had been trying not to fully acknowledge. I understood that my working relationship with Staff Sergeant Vickers was difficult, sir, but I focused on maintaining my professional standards regardless of his assessment. Park closed her laptop. Corporal, we've identified 6 other female Marines in your unit who logged in formal complaints about having their input systematically dismissed or their professional judgment questioned. The pattern extends beyond your individual experience. Rodriguez stood and walked to the window overlooking the base. This investigation started as an assessment of your decision to disobey orders during combat. It has revealed something much larger. Your actions during that ambush were not just tactically sound, they were exemplary. But they occurred in a context where your competence was being actively suppressed rather than properly utilized. What happens now, sir? Now, Rodriguez said, turning back to face her, we complete the formal investigation and present findings to the battalion commander. Your actions during the engagement will be formally recognized. The systematic issues we've identified will be addressed, and Staff Sergeant Vickers will be reassigned pending additional review of his leadership practices. Colonel Hendricks sat behind his desk in the battalion headquarters. The compiled investigation report spread across the surface in front of him. The document ran to 47 pages, including incident analysis, personnel evaluations, interview transcripts, and tactical assessments from multiple sources. Captain Rodriguez and Lieutenant Park stood on the opposite side of the desk, waiting while the colonel reviewed the final summary page. Outside the office, Staff Sergeant Vickers waited in the administrative area, summoned for what he had been told with a routine follow-up regarding the ambush engagement. His posture remained confident, his uniform pressed and immaculate. 3 weeks had passed since the incident, enough time for the initial chaos to settle and for what he assumed would be a standard after-action review. Hendricks closed the report and looked at Rodriguez. Captain, this investigation reveals significant leadership failures. Walk me through your primary findings. Rodriguez stepped forward, his presentation organized and methodical. Sir, the investigation identified 3 critical areas. First, tactical assessment. Corporal Reyes accurately predicted the ambush location based on documented pattern analysis. Her assessment was dismissed as overcautious despite being supported by intelligence data. The ambush occurred exactly as she warned. The colonel made notes while Rodriguez continued. Second, medical preparedness. Reyes carried additional medical supplies that exceeded standard loadout, specifically blood expanders that Staff Sergeant Vickers ordered her to remove. Those supplies proved critical to keeping 2 Marines alive until QRF arrival. Medical analysis confirms both casualties would have died without those resources. And third, tactical decision-making under fire. When Vickers ordered all personnel to hold positions, Reyes assessed that 2 Marines would bleed out before QRF arrived. Her decision to disobey that order and conduct casualty treatment under fire resulted in 2 lives saved. Combat analysts reviewed her tactical movement and characterized it as graduate-level infantry work executed under maximum stress. Hendricks pulled up helmet camera footage on his monitor, watching Reyes coordinate suppressing fire while moving through the kill zone. What's your assessment of the order she disobeyed? Park responded, pulling up relevant doctrine on her tablet. Sir, The order to hold positions followed defensive doctrine for ambush situations. However, doctrine also requires commanders to adapt to developing situations. With 2 casualties suffering from arterial bleeds and QRF response time exceeding survivable windows, the tactical situation required immediate medical intervention. Reyes's assessment was correct. Rodriguez added context. Sir, Staff Sergeant Vickers maintained his hold order despite clear information that casualties were critical. He prioritized force protection over casualty care, even when the tactical situation allowed for movement with acceptable risk. Hendricks reviewed several pages of the report dealing with Vickers's personnel evaluations. This assessment of Corporal Reyes describes her as struggling with stress and demonstrating overcautious tendencies. How does that characterization compare to observed performance? It's contradicted by all available evidence, Sir, Rodriguez said. Reyes demonstrated exceptional stress management, made rapid tactical decisions under fire, and executed complex medical procedures while under direct enemy fire. Her performance was exemplary by any objective measure. The colonel pulled up additional documentation. I see 6 informal complaints from female Marines in Vickers's unit regarding dismissive treatment of their tactical input. None rose to the level of formal complaints, but the pattern is documented. Lieutenant Park, what's your analysis? Park displayed a compiled timeline. Sir, the pattern shows consistent dismissal of female Marines' contributions across multiple operational contexts. Accurate tactical assessments were characterized as fear. Thorough preparation was labeled as overthinking. Professional diligence was reframed as lack of confidence. The pattern affected multiple Marines, but was particularly pronounced with Corporal Reyes. Hendricks closed the report and stood. Send in Staff Sergeant Vickers. Vickers entered the office and came to attention, his confidence evident in his bearing. He clearly expected a routine discussion about the engagement, perhaps even commendation for his unit's performance under difficult circumstances. The presence of Rodriguez and Park suggested something more formal, but his expression remained composed. Staff Sergeant Vickers, Colonel Hendricks began, I've reviewed Captain Rodriguez's investigation into the engagement on Route Tampa. I want to walk through several decisions you made before and during that contact. Yes, sir. I'm prepared to discuss our defensive response and the actions that kept the unit intact until QRF arrival. Let's start with pre-mission planning. Corporal Reyes raised concerns about the patrol route during your briefing. How did you address those concerns? Vickers maintained his professional demeanor. Sir, Corporal Reyes has a pattern of overcautious analysis that can undermine unit confidence. She identified risks that exist on virtually every patrol route in this province. I assessed her concern as excessive and maintained our approved route. The route she identified as high risk was where the ambush occurred. Her analysis was accurate. In retrospect, sir, any route where contact occurs appears to have been high risk. That doesn't validate overcautious approaches to mission planning. Hendricks pulled up the intelligence data. Staff Sergeant, her analysis identified specific temporal and spatial patterns supported by documented incidents. 3 previous attacks in 60 days in the same 2-kilometer section. Her assessment was based on solid intelligence analysis, not overcaution. Vickers shifted slightly. Sir, I maintain that her approach demonstrated reluctance to accept operational risk inherent in our mission. The colonel opened to another section of the report. During gear inspection, you ordered Corporal Reyes to remove blood expanders from her medical kit, stating they were unnecessary weight. Those supplies were subsequently used to keep 2 Marines alive. Explain your reasoning for that order. Standard loadout provides adequate medical capability for expected scenarios, sir. Additional weight reduces the medic's mobility and overall effectiveness. Medical analysis indicates both casualties would have died without those blood expanders. Your order to remove them would have resulted in preventable deaths had Corporal Reyes followed it. Vickers's composure cracked slightly. Sir, I can't be expected to predict every possible scenario. I made a reasonable decision based on standard protocols. Hendricks pulled up the radio transcript from the engagement. During contact, you ordered all personnel, including the medic, to hold positions until QRF arrival. 2 Marines were suffering arterial bleeds at that time. Explain your tactical reasoning. Force protection doctrine prioritizes maintaining defensive positions during active engagement, sir. Moving personnel through a kill zone exposes them to unnecessary risk. The colonel turned his monitor to show footage of Reyes treating casualties under fire. Corporal Reyes disobeyed your order and conducted treatment that saved 2 lives. Combat analysts characterized her tactical movement as exemplary. Your order would have resulted in 2 preventable deaths. Do you acknowledge that assessment? Vickers straightened his shoulders. Sir, she got lucky. Moving through that kill zone was reckless regardless of outcome. Proper doctrine required holding position. Rodriguez stepped forward. Staff Sergeant, doctrine requires adapting to developing situations. Your order failed to account for the tactical reality that casualties would die before QRF arrival. The medic made the correct tactical assessment. She violated a direct order during combat, Vickers said, his voice rising slightly. That alone should result in court-martial regardless of outcome. Hendricks closed the report with deliberate finality. Staff Sergeant Vickers, this investigation reveals a pattern of poor tactical judgment compounded by systematic dismissal of valid input from subordinates. Your accurate threat assessment was ignored. Your appropriate medical preparations were countermanded. Your orders during the engagement would have resulted in preventable casualties. Additionally, your evaluation of Corporal Reyes is contradicted by all objective evidence and appears designed to undermine a highly competent Marine. Sir, I disagree with that characterization. Your disagreement is noted but irrelevant. Effective immediately, you're relieved of your duties and reassigned to non-combat training operations pending further review. You will not lead Marines in operational environments until you demonstrate understanding of adaptive leadership and proper utilization of subordinate expertise. Vickers's face flushed. Sir, I've served 15 years in this Corps. I've led Marines through multiple deployments. One incident where a corporal got lucky doesn't invalidate my record. Hendricks stood, his expression hardening. One incident where a corporal demonstrated superior tactical judgment, made life-saving decisions, and exposed systematic failures in your leadership. Captain Rodriguez will brief you on your reassignment. Dismissed. Vickers saluted mechanically and left the office, his confident bearing replaced by barely controlled anger. Rodriguez followed him out to complete the administrative transfer while Park remained with Colonel Hendricks. The colonel pulled up Reyes's personnel file on his screen. Lieutenant Park, prepare paperwork recommending Corporal Reyes for the Silver Star. Her actions under fire demonstrated exceptional valor and resulted in 2 lives saved. Additionally, I want a comprehensive review of medical asset utilization across the battalion. If we're systematically undermining competent personnel, we need to identify and correct that pattern immediately. 3 weeks after Vickers' reassignment, the battalion operations tempo continued with adjusted leadership structures and new protocols emerging from the investigation findings. Reyes maintained her duties as combat medic while the formal medal recommendation worked through the chain of command. The base had settled into a routine that acknowledged the incident without dwelling on it, though the changes it had triggered continued to ripple through unit operations. Lieutenant Marsh approached Reyes in the medical supply area where she was restocking equipment for an upcoming patrol. His expression carried a weight that suggested the conversation would extend beyond simple logistics. He waited until she finished counting tourniquets before speaking. Corporal Reyes, do you have a few minutes? She secured the medical locker and turned to face him. Yes, sir. Marsh gestured toward a quieter section of the supply area, away from other Marines conducting their own preparations. I wanted to talk to you about the briefing before the ambush, specifically about my failure to support your tactical assessment. Reyes kept her expression neutral. Sir, you made the decision you thought was appropriate based on the information available. No, Marsh said, his tone firm. I made the decision that avoided conflict with my senior NCO. You presented valid tactical concerns supported by documented intelligence. I reviewed that intelligence on my tablet during the briefing. I knew your assessment was solid, but I chose to defer to Vickers rather than back you up, because challenging him would have created friction in the unit. You follow the chain of command, sir. That's appropriate military structure. Marsh shook his head. Chain of command doesn't mean blindly accepting bad judgment from subordinates. I'm the officer. I'm responsible for tactical decisions. When you raised that concern, I should have given it proper weight instead of letting Vickers shut it down. My failure to lead properly put Marines at risk. Reyes considered his words carefully before responding. Sir, with respect, what matters is that you're recognizing it now. Leadership isn't about never making mistakes. It's about learning from them and adjusting. 2 Marines almost died because I didn't want to create friction with my staff sergeant. That's not acceptable, regardless of lesson learned. Marsh pulled out a folded document from his cargo pocket. I submitted a formal statement to Colonel Hendricks acknowledging my failure to properly evaluate your tactical input. It's part of the record now. Sir, that wasn't necessary. Yes, it was. You took responsibility for your decisions during the engagement, even knowing they might result in court-martial. I need to take responsibility for mine. Marsh extended his hand. You're the kind of Marine I should be learning from, not undermining. Thank you for having the courage to do the right thing, even when your leadership failed you. Reyes shook his hand, noting the genuine regret in his expression. The conversation represented something beyond simple apology. It acknowledged the systematic failure that had nearly resulted in preventable deaths and the conscious choice to do better moving forward. Later that afternoon, Rodriguez found Reyes in the Chow Hall reviewing medical protocols on her tablet. He sat across from her with his own lunch tray, his presence drawing attention from nearby Marines who recognized the investigation officer. Corporal Rodriguez said, I wanted to update you on the broader impact of the investigation. Colonel Hendricks has implemented new protocols across the battalion based on the findings. Reyes set her tablet aside. What kind of protocols, sir? First, all NCOs with direct reports are required to document their tactical assessments of subordinate input. If they dismiss a concern or suggestion, they have to provide specific reasoning that can be reviewed later. It creates accountability for evaluation of tactical information regardless of who provides it. That seems like it could create a lot of administrative burden, sir. Rodriguez nodded. It will. But that burden is acceptable if it prevents valid tactical input from being dismissed based on biases rather than merit. Second change. Combat medics are no longer positioned based solely on convoy security considerations. Medical response time becomes a primary factor in force positioning. The changes address specific failures from the ambush, but Reyes understood they would only be effective if leadership actually enforced them. She had seen plenty of well-intentioned policies disappear under operational pressure. Sir, policies are valuable, but changing actual behavior is harder. What happens when an NCO feels pressured to speed up operations and starts cutting corners on documentation? Rodriguez met her eyes directly. That's where the third change comes in. Battalion is establishing a direct reporting mechanism for Marines who observe systematic dismissal of valid input. It bypasses the immediate chain of command and goes straight to company-level leadership. Anyone who uses that mechanism is protected from retaliation. Reyes considered the implications. That could be misused. Marines with legitimate performance issues could claim they're being discriminated against when they're actually just wrong. True, which is why the reports are evaluated by a panel that includes personnel from outside the immediate unit. They assess whether the dismissal was based on merit or bias. It's not a perfect system, but it's better than what we had. A group of Marines from Reyes's unit entered the Chow Hall, including Kowalski and several others who had been on the ambush patrol. They spotted her and made their way over, their body language suggesting they had something specific to discuss. Kowalski spoke first. Hey, document. We heard the colonel approved your Silver Star recommendation. The whole squad wanted to say we think that's outstanding. You earned it. The other Marines nodded their agreement, their expressions showing genuine respect that contrasted sharply with the dismissive attitudes from before the ambush. Chun, still recovering but back on limited duty, pulled up a chair. "We also wanted you to know," Chun said, "that we submitted our own statements to the investigation. All of us. We documented how Vickers had been undermining you, how your tactical calls were solid, and how we failed to back you up when it mattered. Some of us were part of the problem, and we wanted that on record." Reyes looked at the group of Marines who had once mocked her preparations and questioned her judgment. Their willingness to formally acknowledge their own failures represented growth that policies couldn't mandate. Real change came from individuals choosing to do better. "I appreciate that. But what matters more is how we operate going forward. We're still deployed. We still have missions to run. Learning from the past matters, but executing better in the future matters more." Kowalski nodded. "Agreed. And if it helps, the new squad leader actually asked for our input during patrol planning yesterday. All of us, not just the senior Marines. It felt different." Rodriguez stood, gathering his tray. "That's exactly what the policy changes are supposed to enable. Marines providing input based on their expertise and experience. Leadership evaluating that input on merit, and everyone understanding that competence matters more than rank or demographics." After Rodriguez left and the group dispersed, Reyes returned to her medical protocol review. The changes were positive and the acknowledgments were meaningful, but she understood that sustained cultural shift would take years, not weeks. Individual incidents could catalyze change, but maintaining that change required constant vigilance and continuous reinforcement. Her tablet buzzed with a message from Lieutenant Park. The medal ceremony had been scheduled for 2 months out, allowing time for Chun and Harris to recover enough to attend. The formal recognition would matter to some people, particularly those outside the military who needed symbols to understand significance. But for Reyes, the real measure of success would be whether the next competent Marine in a similar situation would be heard before crisis forced the issue. She finished her protocol review and headed back to prepare equipment for the next patrol. The work continued regardless of investigations, policy changes, or medal ceremonies. Marines still needed medical support. Tactical situations still required accurate assessment, and combat still demanded that every person execute their role with maximum competence. The ambush had exposed failures and triggered reforms, but the fundamental mission remained unchanged: keep Marines alive and effective in hostile environments. The sun was setting over Camp Leatherneck when Reyes completed her equipment preparation and secured the medical locker. Tomorrow would bring another mission, another opportunity to demonstrate that competent performance mattered more than politics or prejudice. The path forward was clear, even if the broader cultural change would take time. Do the job well, maintain professional standards, support the mission, and trust that merit would eventually overcome bias. It was not a perfect system, but it was the one she had committed to serve, and her actions during the ambush had proven that individual excellence could force the system to improve. 2 months later, the base parade ground at Camp Leatherneck filled with Marines assembled in formation for the medal ceremony. The Afghan sun beat down on the ranks of service members standing at attention, while senior officers occupied a raised platform at the front. Reyes stood in dress uniform beside Captain Rodriguez, her posture correct and her expression composed despite the significance of the moment. Colonel Hendricks approached the microphone, his voice carrying across the assembled formation through the sound system. "Today we recognize extraordinary valor and tactical excellence demonstrated under the most challenging combat conditions. Corporal Elena Reyes exemplified the highest standards of Marine Corps service during an engagement where her actions directly saved 2 lives and demonstrated leadership that transcended her rank and specialty." Chun and Harris stood in the front row of the formation. Both recovered enough to attend despite ongoing medical treatment. Chin's neck wound had healed with minimal scarring, and doctors projected full recovery within another month. Harris's left arm remained in a specialized brace, his prognosis uncertain but hopeful due to the immediate treatment he had received. Both Marines watched the ceremony with visible emotion. Hendricks continued reading from the citation. On the date in question, Corporal Reyes's unit was engaged by a complex ambush, incorporating an improvised explosive device and coordinated small arms fire. 2 Marines sustained critical arterial wounds requiring immediate intervention that exceeded available response time from quick reaction forces. Corporal Reyes assessed that both casualties would expire before evacuation arrival and made the tactical decision to conduct treatment under direct enemy fire. The assembled Marines remained at attention, but Reyes could sense the weight of their focus. The story had spread throughout the base over the past 2 months, taking on various embellishments and interpretations. The official citation would establish the formal record, stripping away speculation and documenting the objective facts. Utilizing advanced infantry tactics, Corporal Reyes moved through an active kill zone under direct fire, employed smoke and suppressing fire coordination, and reached both casualties despite significant enemy pressure. She applied tourniquets, hemostatic agents, and blood replacement therapy that stabilized both Marines until evacuation arrived. Medical analysis confirms both casualties would have expired without her immediate intervention. Her actions demonstrated exceptional tactical competence, medical expertise, and personal courage under maximum stress conditions. Reyes's parents sat in the guest section, having flown from California to attend the ceremony. Her mother wiped tears from her eyes, while her father sat rigid with pride, his own military service giving him context to fully appreciate the significance of his daughter's actions. They had read the investigation report and understood that the medal represented more than just a successful rescue. It validated their daughter's competence after months of systematic undermining. The Silver Star is awarded to Corporal Elena Reyes for gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States. Her distinctive accomplishment reflects great credit upon herself and upholds the highest traditions of the Marine Corps and the United States Naval Service. Rodriguez stepped forward with the medal case, opening it to reveal the Silver Star suspended from its distinctive ribbon. Hendricks took the medal and pinned it to Reyes's uniform while the formation rendered salute. The moment held ceremonial weight that transcended the individual recognition, representing institutional acknowledgement that competence and courage mattered regardless of the biases that had tried to suppress them. After the formation dismissed, Chun and Harris approached Reyes while her parents waited nearby. Chun spoke first, his voice carrying emotion that his professional bearing couldn't entirely mask. "Corporal, I've been thinking about what to say for 2 months, and I still don't have adequate words. You saved my life after I mocked your professionalism. You proved yourself right after I dismissed your judgment. I was wrong about you, and I'm grateful you were better than I deserved." Harris extended his right hand, his left arm still braced, but showing signs of returning function. "The doctors say I'll have about 70% mobility in this arm eventually. That's 70% more than I would have had without you. My daughter got to see her father again because you refused to follow orders that would have killed me. Thank you doesn't begin to cover it, but thank you." Reyes shook his hand, recognizing that their gratitude carried a complexity beyond simple appreciation. They were acknowledging not just the rescue, but their own participation in a system that had tried to suppress the capability that ultimately saved them. The recognition required confronting their own biases, and their willingness to do so represented growth that mattered beyond individual redemption. Kowalski approached with several other Marines from the patrol unit. "We wanted you to know," he said, "that the whole squad submitted a request to keep you as our primary combat medic for the rest of the deployment. Not because we feel guilty, but because we trust your judgment now. We should have trusted it before, but we definitely trust it now." The group dynamics had shifted fundamentally since the ambush. Reyes's tactical input was actively solicited during mission planning. Her medical assessments were given proper weight, and her presence in the unit was treated as an asset rather than a diversity obligation. The change was evident in dozens of small interactions that collectively represented cultural transformation. Lieutenant Marsh stood at a distance, waiting until the other Marines had finished before approaching. He carried a folder containing what appeared to be official documents. "Corporal, I wanted you to see this. It's the after-action report from our most recent patrol. I made sure to document that your tactical assessment of the route was incorporated into our planning and that your recommended medical preparations proved appropriate for the mission profile. I'm creating a record that shows how the unit should have been operating all along. Sir, that's not necessary for my benefit. It's necessary for the next female Marine who joins this unit, and the one after that. Documentation creates accountability and establishes standards. If I document what right looks like, it's harder for future leaders to slip back into old patterns. Rodriguez appeared at the edge of the gathering, waiting for an appropriate moment to interrupt. When the group noticed him, he stepped forward with his characteristic professional demeanor. Corporal Reyes, Colonel Hendricks would like you and your parents to join him for a brief reception. He has some additional information to share about the investigation's broader impact. The reception was held in a conference room that had been arranged with refreshments and seating for a small group. Hendricks greeted Reyes's parents personally, his respect for their daughter evident in his body language and tone. After brief pleasantries, he directed the conversation toward the institutional changes that had emerged from the investigation. Mr. and Mrs. Reyes, your daughter's actions during the ambush saved 2 lives. But the investigation that followed revealed systematic issues that have been affecting multiple Marines. The reforms we've implemented aren't just about one incident. They're about creating a culture where competence is properly recognized and utilized regardless of demographics or personal biases. Reyes's father nodded, his expression serious. Colonel, I served 22 years in the Army. I know how difficult it is to change institutional culture. Policies are easy. Changing minds is hard. What mechanisms are you putting in place to ensure these reforms actually stick? Hendricks appreciated the direct question. We've implemented mandatory training for all NCOs on bias recognition and proper evaluation of subordinate input. We've established accountability measures that require documentation of tactical assessments. And we've created reporting mechanisms that allow Marines to flag systematic dismissal of valid input without fear of retaliation. None of these are perfect, but together they create multiple layers of accountability. And what happened to the staff sergeant who was undermining my daughter? Reyes's mother asked, her tone protective despite the formal setting. Staff Sergeant Vickers has been reassigned to non-combat training duties pending completion of a comprehensive leadership review, Hendricks replied. He will not return to operational leadership unless he demonstrates fundamental change in his approach to evaluating and utilizing subordinate capabilities. Additionally, his evaluation of your daughter has been formally removed from her record and replaced with accurate assessments based on her demonstrated performance. Rodriguez added context. The investigation also identified 6 other female Marines who had experienced similar patterns of dismissal. Each case is being reviewed individually, and appropriate corrections are being made to their records. The goal is not just to fix Corporal Reyes's situation, but to address the systematic pattern that affected multiple personnel. Reyes listened to the discussion about institutional change and policy implementation, understanding that the real measure of success would come years later when these reforms either survived or disappeared under operational pressure. The medal ceremony represented formal recognition, but sustained cultural change required commitment that extended far beyond individual incidents. Her mother turned to her directly. Honey, how do you feel about all this? The recognition, the investigation, the changes? Reyes considered her response carefully. Mom, I did my job. The fact that doing my job well required disobeying orders and triggered an investigation reveals problems in the system. I'm glad those problems are being addressed. But what matters most is that Sean and Harris are alive, and that future Marines in similar situations won't face the same obstacles I faced. If the reforms accomplish that, then the whole experience will have been worth it. 6 months after the medal ceremony, Reyes completed her deployment and returned to Camp Pendleton in California. The transition from combat operations to garrison duty brought its own challenges, but the investigation's impact continued to ripple through Marine Corps medical training programs and leadership development curricula. Her case had become a teaching example in multiple contexts, though she rarely discussed it beyond official requirements. The base medical facility assigned her to advanced combat casualty care instruction, training the next generation of medics who would deploy to combat zones. Her classroom contained 23 students, a mix of new corpsmen and experienced medics upgrading their certifications. She stood at the front reviewing a tactical medical scenario projected on the screen. This scenario presents arterial bleeding in a hostile fire environment with extended evacuation times. What's your priority action sequence? A young corpsman in the front row raised his hand. Establish security first, then approach the casualty when a tactical situation permits. Reyes shook her head. Security is important, but a Marine with arterial bleeding has approximately 3 minutes before permanent damage occurs. If you wait for perfect security, you're recovering a body instead of treating a casualty. You assess the tactical situation, identify movement windows, and you move. Your job is to reach that Marine and stop the bleeding, even if that means accepting risk. The distinction represented lessons learned through experience that couldn't be adequately conveyed through classroom instruction alone. The students were taking notes, but Reyes knew the real learning would occur when they faced their own tactical decisions under stress. Training provided framework. Experience provided understanding. Another student asked about supply loadout decisions, specifically regarding weight versus capability trade-offs. The question triggered memories of Vickers's criticism about her medical pack weight and the blood expanders that had saved 2 lives despite being labeled unnecessary. Carry what you need to keep your Marines alive, period. If someone tells you that life-saving equipment is unnecessary weight, you document their order and you carry it anyway. Your job is saving lives, not meeting arbitrary weight standards. Every supply item in your pack should have a clear purpose tied to casualty care under realistic combat conditions. After the class dismissed, Rodriguez appeared in the hallway outside the training facility. He had also returned from deployment and now worked in the division headquarters, coordinating medical asset utilization across multiple battalions. His presence suggested something beyond casual visit. Corporal Reyes, do you have time to review a policy proposal? They moved to a nearby office where Rodriguez spread documents across a conference table. The proposal outlined new combat medic positioning guidelines based on lessons learned from multiple engagements, including the Route Tampa ambush. The technical language translated to practical changes in how medical personnel were integrated into combat operations. This will fundamentally change how we employ medics in the field, Rodriguez explained. Medical response time becomes a primary consideration in force positioning, not just an afterthought to security concerns. The Route Tampa engagement proved that having the medic in position to respond quickly matters more than keeping them protected in the rear. Reyes reviewed the tactical diagrams showing various formation options. Sir, this makes sense operationally, but it will face resistance from leaders who prioritize force protection over medical response capability. I know, which is why we're building a case using multiple engagement analyses, not just your incident. The data shows that medic positioning affects casualty survival rates more than almost any other variable we can control. Leadership will have to justify why they're ignoring evidence-based tactical guidance. The conversation continued for an hour, reviewing implementation challenges and potential resistance points. The policy represented systemic change emerging from individual experience, the kind of institutional evolution that occurred when competent professionals forced organizations to confront uncomfortable truths. 2 years after that meeting, Reyes received promotion to sergeant and assignment as the senior medical NCO for a training battalion. Her responsibilities included developing curriculum, mentoring new medics, and ensuring that combat casualty care training reflected current best practices rather than outdated doctrine. The position provided leverage to influence how thousands of future medics would be trained. She stood in her office reviewing course materials when a knock interrupted her concentration. A young female lance corporal entered, her posture suggesting both nervousness and determination. The name tape on her uniform read Martinez. Sergeant Reyes, I was hoping to talk to you about something. My squad leader has been dismissing my tactical input during training exercises, and I'm not sure how to address it professionally. Reyes gestured for Martinez to sit, recognizing the pattern immediately. Tell me specifically what's happening. Martinez described situations where her accurate tactical assessments were characterized as overcautious, where her thorough preparation was labeled as overthinking, and where her questions were treated as evidence of poor judgment. The details mirrored Reyes's own experience so closely that it confirmed the cultural change efforts remained incomplete despite policy reforms. Have you documented these interactions? Martinez shook her head. I didn't want to seem like I was complaining or creating problems. I thought maybe if I just proved myself through performance, the dismissive treatment would stop. Reyes pulled out the reporting forms that had been implemented after the Route Tampa investigation. Document everything: dates, times, specific statements, witnesses present. Use the direct reporting mechanism that bypasses your immediate chain of command. The reforms we fought for are designed to protect Marines in exactly your situation, but they only work if people actually use them. What if using the reporting system makes things worse? What if my squad leader retaliates? Then he gets relieved, just like the staff sergeant who tried to suppress my input got relieved. The system isn't perfect, but it's better than suffering in silence and hoping things improve. You have a right to have your tactical competence properly evaluated regardless of your gender. Martinez took the forms, her expression showing both relief and apprehension. Thank you, Sergeant. I heard about what happened during your deployment, about the ambush and the investigation. It gave me hope that the Marine Corps actually cares about fixing these problems. 4 years after the Route Tampa ambush, Chun and Harris both attended a reunion event for Marines who had served in their unit. Chun had completed his service and transitioned to civilian life as an emergency medical technician, his combat experience translating naturally to pre-hospital emergency care. Harris had remained in the Marine Corps despite limited mobility in his left arm, serving in training and administrative roles that utilized his tactical experience without requiring full physical capability. They found Reyes at the reunion and pulled her aside to share updates about their lives and careers. Chun described how he regularly told his EMT students about the combat medic who saved his life through competence and courage. Harris explained that he now taught classes on tactical decision-making where the Route Tampa engagement served as a case study in adaptive leadership under stress. Your story changed how the Marine Corps trains leaders, Harris said. That ambush isn't just about you saving our lives anymore. It's about what happens when institutions suppress competence and what's required to force them to change. Reyes appreciated their perspective, but maintained focus on practical impact. What matters is whether female Marines joining units today face the same obstacles I faced. If they do, then we haven't actually fixed the problem. We just documented it better. The conversation was interrupted by a young sergeant approaching with her own story about how the reporting mechanisms had protected her from retaliation after she documented systematic dismissal of her tactical input. The reforms were working in some units while failing in others, creating an inconsistent experience that depended heavily on individual leadership quality. 6 years after Route Tampa, Reyes received orders to the Marine Corps Combat Development Command, where she would help design future medical training programs and tactical doctrine. The position represented significant influence over how the institution would train and employ thousands of medical personnel over decades. Her combat experience and institutional knowledge made her uniquely qualified to ensure that reform survived beyond individual incidents. What did you think of Elena's story? Have you ever had to prove yourself when no one believed in you? Drop a comment below. She sat in her new office reviewing proposed changes to combat medic employment doctrine, recognizing that cultural change remained an ongoing process rather than a completed achievement. The Route Tampa ambush had forced important reforms, but maintaining those reforms required constant vigilance and continuous advocacy. Every female Marine who joined the Corps would face some version of the challenges Reyes had confronted, and the measure of institutional progress was whether they faced those challenges with support structures or in isolation. Her phone buzzed with a message from Martinez. now a corporal serving in her own combat deployment. The message contained a photo of Martinez with her squad, all of them displaying genuine respect and professional camaraderie. The caption read, "They listen now. Thank you for showing us it was possible to make them listen." Reyes saved the photo and returned to her doctrine review. The work continued, one policy at a time, one leader at a time, one generation of Marines at a time. The ambush had been 6 years ago, but its lessons remained relevant as long as competent professionals had to fight institutional bias alongside enemy forces. Progress was measurable but incomplete, and the path forward required the same combination of competence, courage, and unwillingness to accept inadequate standards that had defined her actions on Route Tampa.